So how about maybe we'll go ahead and get started. There's a few announcements we'll go over. And then Jonathan will do the research corner, which is just kind of giving an introduction to your topic, Dr. Van Dyk, and then you'll be on, and hopefully we'll have a really nice discussion regarding pediatric sleep. But the first business item, I'm actually going to share my screen. Some of you may have gotten notification about this, but our Pediatrics SIG base camp is now up and running. So let me show you what that is. If you've been a part of it, if you're not a part of it, we can get you to be a part of it. Essentially, it is a Basecamp is basically like the platform that CFHA uses. I know leadership, we've used it. Some other SIGs have used it to kind of upload resources, have chats, messages, things like that. So we just created this. So if you've attended a meeting previously, if you registered, you were automatically added. And I think moving forward, and I'll confirm with Jackie, that if you aren't a part of this and you register, that you can be a part of it moving forward. So going to be a space for us for resources. We already have a question. Jessica asked a question about school-based COCM. So if anyone has any experience in that area, she's already asked for resources and expertise in that area. So again, we just hope that it's a place for the SIG, specifically people who come to the meetings, to have resources and questions. Of course, you could always post questions to the listserv that goes out to everyone, of course, but here it's just kind of our group. So I wanted to make people aware of that if they haven't already seen that we sent a message, a reminder about the meeting today. And so will be further kind of updates and things going on with that platform moving forward. All right, other announcements. I think Amelia put in the chat about our member spotlight. We haven't had one in a little bit, but as a reminder, it's just kind of a time, a brief introduction for anyone here who wants to tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing. Maybe like 1 to 2 minute introduction, because we have really a larger group of people, some that are new. So if you're interested in doing a brief kind of member spotlight, please reach out to Amelia. Amelia may also reach out to some of you who have been coming consistently. So look out for that. And also a reminder, we're halfway through the year. It's kind of crazy to think this is our 6th meeting. So, but if there's still some content areas, topics that people would like to see, our November and December meetings are open. So that's a little bit later, several months away, but just putting a plug out there if you have any interest or particular areas you'd like to see, or if you would like to present, this is how you do it yourself, we would love to have you. Our upcoming July meeting is going to be on July 1st, and we're going to have Mary Virginia Maxwell, who's going to be presenting on early relational health at that meeting. So just an FYI of that coming up. And I think that's it for announcements. So what we will do now, before Dr. Van Dyk moves into her presentation on pediatric sleep, we'll have Jonathan Larson, our research corner, or do our research corner, our research lead, just present 1 or 2 research articles related to the topic area to kind of give us that foundation and hopefully kind of start the thinking about discussion questions and whatnot.
All right. Hi, everyone. Nice to see everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm actually coming over a cold myself, so I guess June is really a rough time. And I'd like to thank Dr. Van Dyk for being here today, and also for providing 2 recommended articles to introduce us to this topic. Both are great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll just briefly cover these, but as always, please further review them. Any additional questions you may have. Let me resize this real quick. All right, so the first article we're going to cover is, the first article, Primary Care Providers, Practices Regarding Patient Sleep. Impact of integrated behavioral health. So while many children and adolescents experience sleep issues, research indicates pediatric providers rarely screen for, diagnose, and treat sleep concerns. To date, no research has examined whether primary care providers who practice in integrated primary care are more likely to assess sleep concerns than primary care providers not in integrated primary care. The current study aimed to examine whether providers' current practices and knowledge regarding common sleep topics from clinics with and without integrated primary care. Participants included 101 primary care providers across a large health system of 38 clinics, 67 providers in integrated primary care, 34 not. Most participants identified as white females in their 30s, MDs or DOs, and were either 20 years post-residency or had completed their residency in the past 5 years. Participants responded to questions regarding current sleep assessment and intervention practices, general sleep, and medication knowledge. As for the results, primary care providers in both settings reported moderate comfort with behavioral interventions, however, low comfort with medical interventions, and had low medication knowledge scores. The authors mentioned that, for example, that providers weren't sure whether clonidine or trazodone were effective and approved treatments for insomnia in children. While primary care providers in both settings recognize the importance of addressing sleep-related concerns, integrated primary care clinics were 3.58 times more likely to screen for snoring than non-IPC clinics. Therefore, this study concluded that primary care providers in both settings have room for improvement in their knowledge of effective behavioral and medication interventions. Integrating primary care providers into primary care integrating behavioral health providers into primary care offices can enhance primary care providers' knowledge and comfort with behavioral interventions, particularly for the assessment and treatment of sleep concerns. Behavioral health providers can facilitate training and work collaboratively with primary care providers to improve patient access to sleep intervention. And you see here, just having a behavioral health provider was associated with higher rates of screening for snoring and can also improve access to evidence-based interventions for obstructive sleep apnea. This next study reviews an adapted intervention, Sleep Well, in an urban primary care setting. So few evidence-based behavioral sleep interventions have been tested with families from lower SES backgrounds. Therefore, to address this gap, community-engaged research from clinicians and caregivers were used to adapt and test Sleep Well, an intervention for early childhood insomnia and insufficient sleep. Again, specifically designed for families from lower SES backgrounds visiting a large metropolitan primary care websites. 15 caregiver child dyads were recruited from 2 urban primary care sites to participate in Sleep Well. Most participating caregivers were Black mothers with a young child aged 3 years on average. The children were Black girls mostly, and half the families were living at or below the 125% of the US poverty line. Inclusion criteria for this study was English-speaking caregiver, age 18 years or older, legal guardian of a child 1 to 5 in an urban primary care site. Caregiver reported small to severe child sleep problems. Child met diagnostic criteria for pediatric insomnia or insufficient sleep. And there was not a diagnosed medical or neurodevelopmental condition that could impact sleep. So the Sleep Well intervention is based primarily on evidence-based practice, behavioral sleep interventions and recommendations, such as providing psychoeducation, sleep duration guidelines, importance of sleep for young children, sleep hygiene, consistent bedtime, 9 p.m., avoidance of caffeine, electronics, differential reinforcement for bedtime tantrums, methods to promote independent sleep onset, gradually reducing caregiver presence at bedtime. However, the Sleep Well adapted these above strategies based on qualitative feedback from input from caregivers and clinicians. And the adaptions included this model right here. And so to briefly go over these, the peripheral adaptions or the intervention delivery were to, offers the initial qualitative group, which were caregivers and clinicians, determined to offer services in primary care, increase visual aids, and reduce literacy levels of handouts, provide graphics of similar racial ethnic backgrounds, provide information via text messages and emails, apply flexible, collaborative, and empowering approach with families as experts of their child and family-centered goals, directly assess potential clinicians' bias, and when you add the family advisory board of caregivers, the team determined to increase the number of intervention sessions and phone calls from 2 to 3, to provide telehealth or telehealth video during the COVID pandemic. Let's see. And then as far as the core adaptions, the intervention strategies that adapted from these standard evidence-based practices to eliminate this 9 p.m. bedtime recommendations to prioritize sleep schedule consistency and duration instead of timing, emphasize sleep duration education, reframe eliminating electronics usage at bedtime as reducing electronics at bedtime overnight, add strategies to address shared sleep arrangements and or multiple sleep locations, provide education on caffeine, beverages, looking at nutritional labels, and add guidance to address potential changes in future caregiver work, child school, family schedules, arrangements. Again, please review the article for more further detail on those. And as far as the methods, what they looked at, they measured feasibility, retention, and family engagement, acceptability, such as I found the sleep intervention strategies to be acceptable. Cultural humility looked at whether it included questions about whether the caregivers felt they were treated with respect and the extent to which the interventionist was open to and understanding of the caregiver's beliefs. They used the brief child sleep questionnaire to look at all of the sleep outcomes. And they also engage in a post-intervention caregiver interview. As for the results, 13 of the 15 families completed all intervention components of sleep well. There was strong acceptability. All caregivers, 100%, agreed or strongly agreed that the intervention was acceptable and they liked the strategies, would use them in the future, felt positive about the strategies. No families felt uncomfortable and agreed that strategies would result in permanent change and were effective. 100% of caregivers agreed or strongly agreed that they were treated respectfully and their families' values and beliefs were accepted, that there was an openness to the caregiver's point of view, and that they appreciated the caregiver's expertise. 90% agreed or strongly agreed that their family's culture background were understood. And as far as child outcomes, you see always significant reductions in child sleep problems, bedroom electronic sleep onset latency, and night awaking frequency and duration, significant improvements in nighttime sleep duration and overall insufficient sleep. And at this post-qualitative interview, parents reported strong acceptability and perceived flexibility with the program. However, there were a few participation barriers relatively around this overnight and flexible caregiver work schedule or multiple sleep environments, babysitters, and stuff like that. Therefore, the overall conclusion suggests that sleep well is a highly feasible to implement in primary care and was well received by families. It demonstrated cultural humility and improved child sleep in a sample of caregiver child dyads from primarily lower SES and or racially minoritized backgrounds. And sleep well shows promise as an effective method for increasing access to sleep treatment and promoting pediatric sleep health equity. And that's all I really had to share today. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jonathan. I think those are good kind of background articles that maybe we can dig in deeper, especially this last one as it relates to kind of this cultural adaptation for sleep interventions, and curious how other people have maybe adapted their interventions as well. But we'll circle back to that. And so let's jump in. Today we have Dr. Tori Van Dyk from Loma Linda University, who's going to be talking to us about pediatric sleep. So take it away.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor. I always enjoy talking about pediatric sleep and particularly how we can better serve youth in integrated care settings. Um, so I'll go ahead and jump into it here briefly. Just a quick agenda. First of all, these are my sleeping children, so I have a personal, as in addition to a professional, interest in pediatric sleep. Although these babies are now in kindergarten and third grade, so we're a bit beyond that stage. So first of all, we're going to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the ways in which biology, behavior, environment all impact healthy sleep. And I think this is really important because as integrated behavioral health providers, if we can understand these things, then we can do really targeted and effective assessments and provide really targeted interventions in a brief period of time. So I think having this background is important both for assessment, which will be our second objective, and then our evidence-based treatment. Um, so let's go ahead and make sure, if I can make this move, okay, that we're all on the same page in terms of kind of just the background of sleep. So this graph here comes from the National Sleep Foundation. It shows us how much sleep individuals need across development. There in the dark blue is the optimal sleep range. So you can see if you're a toddler, you'll be getting about 11 to 14 hours of sleep. If you're teenager, you should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. If you're falling within that teal range, that may be appropriate, but we really don't want to see our kids and teens in the orange range above or below. So oversleeping is also problematic. Now, these sleep duration recommendations are based off of really decades of research, in addition to expertise from several clinicians that came together to develop these. So we have a really good idea of how much sleep is needed. However, when we look at how much sleep kids are getting, we know that they're not getting enough. So insufficient sleep is a huge problem. So if you just orient you to this graph, this is self-reported sleep on school nights here in the red, and then non-school nights in the blue. And this starts in sixth grade and goes through 12th grade. So if you compare these to the clinical recommendations that I just presented, what we know is that a majority of kids on a majority of nights, so looking at the school nights, are not getting enough sleep. So insufficient sleep is very common. In addition to that, sleep problems are very common. So this is difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, waking up too early, bedtime resistance. So these problems with sleep are also very common and are even more common in kids who are presenting with comorbidities, such as emotional and behavioral problems. So why do we care? We know kids are not getting enough sleep. We know sleep problems are really common. Who cares? I could give an entire lecture just on this slide alone, but I'm going to hold back and essentially say, think of the thing that you're really passionate about as a provider. What is the aspect of functioning or well-being that you really, really latch onto? And it's really likely that sleep is either associated with or causally impacting that thing. So we know that sleep is directly related to most well-being in youth. And so my sort of soapbox is that if we can quickly assess and treat sleep problems in integrated care, it will likely make treating these other things, emotional and behavioral health, physical health problems, adherence to medications, all of these things in theory should become a little bit easier if we can level sleep out. All right. So making sure that we're all on the same page about how sleep works in the body and then other things that can impact sleep. There are essentially two broad components of sleep. Behaviorally, we need to try to fall asleep. That's really easier said than done. So if you've had a young child that you've worked with who is really resistant to bedtime, or perhaps if you've had a teenager who wants to be on their phone before bedtime, the act of falling, getting into bed, putting your phone down, closing your eyes and trying to fall asleep can be a difficult part of treatment, but it is a very important part. The second part is the things that biologically happen. And this is broken down into two components. And so we have our endogenous circadian rhythm. That's our biological clock. It tells us it's tied to levels of alertness, tells us not only when we're feeling sleepy, but is also tied to other aspects of functioning, such as when you're going to have your fastest reaction time, when you're going to perhaps be best taking a test. So that circadian rhythm is tied to more than just sleep. And then the other part is that homeostatic process or the sleep drive, which acts as a battery. And I'm going to go into both of these in a bit more detail because I I do think they're important to understand when we're treating sleep. So these two biological processes together is called a two-process theory of sleep. And what you're seeing here is two lines. So this blue line here, which is somewhat linear, that's our homeostatic sleep drive or that sleep battery. So you can see at 7 a.m., you wake up in the morning and that battery is drained throughout the day. Or the other way to think about it is your sleep pressure or your propensity to want to fall asleep increases throughout the day. When you go to bed at night, this shaded area being the sleep gate, as you fall asleep at night, that battery gets charged up or your propensity to fall asleep decreases. And you do that throughout the day, again, in a somewhat linear fashion. Now, if we only had our homeostatic sleep drive, and occasionally we will work with kids and teens that are really just driven by this homeostatic sleep drive due to, I've had kids who have had, certain resections in their brain due to cancer or epilepsy. And these kids sometimes are just using this homeostatic sleep drive. And if you only have that homeostatic sleep drive, what happens is at about dinner time, you're going to want to fall asleep in your spaghetti plate. You're going to be really tired. And then on the opposite end, at about 3-4 o'clock in the morning, you're going to be awake enough to want to be awake for the day. So when I've worked with these kids, they actually feel fine when they're awake, but it's a problem for their parents because, again, kid wants to go to sleep at 5, they want to wake up at 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. So in order to kind of counteract this, our circadian rhythm kicks in and is going to help keep us awake in the early evening hours, and it's going to help keep us asleep in those early morning hours. So you can see that circadian drive for arousal or alertness sort of peaks in those early evening hours. It keeps us awake through the evening. It begins to dip when these two things come together. We sleep, and then it's going to keep us asleep in those early morning hours, and we're going to wake up and do it again. So these two processes are important to understand because there are several things that can disrupt these processes and make sleep more difficult, which we'll talk about here on this slide. So first of all, any oversleeping. If you go to bed late and then decide to sleep in the next day, what will happen is that sleep pressure will take longer to build and you're going to want to stay up later and have a harder time falling asleep that night. Napping, hugely important, particularly in teens and young adults. So if you get home from school and you take a quick nap right here, what happens is this blue line is going to get shifted to the left, and it's going to make it harder to fall asleep. And notably, our teens and young adults have a slower buildup of sleep pressure, meaning it takes them longer to drain their battery than it does younger kids or older adults. So naps are very powerful in teens, which is why they're particularly problematic. Of course, caffeine can make us not feel as sleepy, so that can also be a problem. When it comes to that circadian drive for arousal or that circadian rhythm, puberty impacts the circadian rhythm. So when our kids are hitting puberty, they have later secretion of melatonin, which means that biological clock, this blue line or this green line here, naturally and in a developmentally expected way, gets shifted about 2 hours later, meaning teens are going to want to stay up about 2 hours later and they're going to want to sleep in 2 hours later. And this also gets reinforced through behavior and socialization where they're going to want to behaviorally stay up later. Their bodies want to stay up later. And so we need to do a lot to kind of keep them on the clock that society wants us to be on. Zeitgebers, these are external cues or time setters that keep our circadian rhythm in line. Light is the strongest Zeitgeber and the most important Zeitgeber. So we're all familiar with light exposure before bed, and we know if you get light exposure before bed, what happens is that circadian rhythm can be shifted later. Excuse me. Um, hmm, I apologize. I have a feeling that might happen. We're going to try to roll with it. So if we get light exposure, first thing in the morning, what that actually does is it shifts our circadian rhythm to the left and will make it easier to fall asleep the next night. So we not only want to avoid light in the evening, we want to get light first thing in the morning. Okay. Other influences on sleep, there are many brain regions, hormones, neurotransmitters that are involved in sleep. We're not going to go into too much detail there. From an environmental and social perspective, one thing that is important to know is that we can override these biological influences, meaning that we can stay up past the time that our body wants to fall asleep. But importantly, we cannot force our body to fall asleep when we're not ready without some use of medication. So what often happens, and we see this really a lot in kids and teens, is that parents are either trying to put their kids asleep when their body is not ready, or teens or young adults are trying to go to sleep when their body is not ready. And what happens is they get into bed, they try to sleep before their body is ready. They spend a lot of time in bed awake trying to fall asleep, which causes frustration and arousal. And then what happens is the bed then becomes associated with wakefulness and arousal as opposed to being associated with sleep. And that is one of the most common mechanisms of insomnia in kids and teens. Now, of course, emotional, psychological, and physical health impact sleep. And then we know that racial and ethnic disparities, particularly discrimination, can also make sleep more difficult. All right, so a lot of things, that's kind of our background on sleep. Now let's talk briefly on how we should assess sleep in these integrated care settings. Okay, so this is the chronic insomnia diagnostic criteria from the DSM that I'm not going to go into that much detail. What I'm going to say is when we're making a diagnosis, a kid or a teen needs to have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up too early, or bedtime resistance. It needs to result in some kind of daytime problem. And it can't be because the patient does not have a safe space, they don't have a comfortable sleep space, or they're not allowed enough time to sleep. So pretty easy diagnostic criteria. But all of that said, we know, particularly in the research that we've conducted, that subclinical symptoms really, really do matter. So if a kid or a parent is saying, I have a hard time sleeping, it's very likely that is impacting their daytime functioning, and it's something we should pay attention to. Okay, so Judy Owens and colleagues actually developed an acronym to be used within primary care settings to assess sleep. And this acronym is the BEARS acronym, and it goes over the major areas that we should be assessing in these settings. So the first one here relates to bedtime, which is a pretty simple question of, do you have difficulty going to bed or falling asleep? With younger kids, that's going to include bedtime resistance. But I do always like to pause and just mention here that we live in a very sleep deprived society, and everybody's expectations for how quickly it should take you to fall asleep is based off of the fact that many of us are falling asleep within 5 minutes. A lot of people, head hits the pillow and they fall asleep. That's actually a clinical sign of insufficient sleep. If you're able to fall asleep within 5 minutes, you're not getting enough sleep. For individuals who are regularly getting the correct amount of sleep, it should take about 20 minutes to fall asleep. So if you have a teenager and they come in, it says it takes me forever to fall asleep, and you ask how long, and they say 20 minutes, you get to go, this is great news. That's exactly what you should be doing. And so sometimes what we're doing is we're setting expectations that falling asleep too quickly is actually a problem. Excessive sleepiness. This is just assessing for if they feel sleepy throughout the day, if they need a nap. If they're napping after the age of 5, that is, again, another sign of clinical sleepiness. I always, again, like to mention that in younger kids, excessive sleepiness can look like disinhibition or ADHD-like symptoms. So kind of that wild running around, as opposed to that droopiness, wanting to fall asleep. Awakenings. This refers to, do you wake up in the middle of the night and, importantly, have trouble going back to sleep? So it is expected, every single one of us, we go through our stages of REM and non-REM sleep, and at the end of each sleep cycle, about every 90 to 120 minutes, our brains briefly wake up. A vast majority of people do not remember waking up. So it's normal to wake up. It's only a problem if you're not falling back asleep within about 5 to 10 minutes. or maybe even 10 to 15 minutes. So it's normal to wake up, but those normal awakenings can become problematic if you have high anxiety, or if you have insomnia, or if you're a little kid and you want to play with your Legos. So while those awakenings can be normal, if you're having trouble going back to sleep, that's when they're a problem. Regularity and duration refers to, are you going to bed and waking up around the same time, and do you get enough sleep? More recent research, including some research we've done within our lab, indicates that consistency in sleep is almost more important than duration. So going to bed and waking up at the same time every day is incredibly important, and we don't want to vary that by more than a couple of hours. And then finally, snoring, that refers to obstructive sleep apnea or some sort of other sleep apnea disorder. Central sleep apnea could be possible. This is where we're going to hopefully bring our pediatricians in. If we have a kiddo who has a lot of behavior problems and they also snore, we want to send them for a sleep study and see perhaps that could be obstructive sleep apnea. Okay. So that's how you assess for sleep. Let's go ahead and talk about some sleep interventions. First, I'm going to talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. This is used most commonly with older children, adolescents, and then adults. And CBTI is very effective, very well studied, and it includes all these components up on the screen. So we're going to give sleep psychoeducation, sleep hygiene, stimulus control. We're also can use other strategies like sleep restriction, relaxation, and cognitive therapy. I'm only going to review these first three today. I think these are the most powerful and integrated care settings. Although I never will turn down relaxation. I would, we just don't have time to talk about it. But these are really important parts of establishing a consistent routine. So first of all, when we're doing sleep psychoeducation, you're essentially going to give your patients the exact same psychoeducation I just gave us. How much sleep do you need? What's the basic biology? Helping them understand why they're waking up in the middle of the night, or why their biology might be off. Making sure that they are, whenever possible, sleeping in a cool, dark, comfortable environment that's free from distraction. We do want to always check in on sleep hygiene. So no TV 30 to 60 minutes before bed, no caffeine. Ask everyone, no matter how old they are. We know 30% of preschoolers and 43% of school-age kids have a TV in their bedroom. We know 27% of preschoolers and 41% of school-age kids have at least one caffeinated drink per day. So if you've got a 3-year-old in your office and you think, can probably skip over these two, please don't. Also look for the sneaky caffeine. Sweet tea. I've worked with a lot of families who just didn't realize that sweet tea had caffeine in it. Chocolate milk can also give a little boost of caffeine. So if your kiddo's chugging a glass of chocolate milk right before bed, that may impact their sleep. Some other aspects of sleep hygiene, smoking, drugs, alcohol can impact sleep. We know that regular exercise can be helpful for sleep, but not right before bed. So exercise is tied to the circadian rhythm. If you exercise right before bed, what happens is that it is increases your alertness. It also increases your internal body temperature, and your internal body temperature at nighttime should be dropping with your circadian rhythm. So anything we do to artificially raise our internal body temperature, exercise being one. If you take a really, really hot shower or a bath and you keep your body hot, that can also actually impact your circadian rhythm as well. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Avoiding screens, and then making sure you're getting exposure to sunlight first thing in the morning. Now, a quick caveat on sleep hygiene. If you have individuals, kids and teens who have insomnia, it is very likely that they have been told sleep hygiene, sleep hygiene, sleep hygiene over and over and over again. What we know, and we actually just have a paper in press right now, is that for individuals with insomnia, they actually often have really good sleep hygiene because they've been trying to fix their sleep for a long time. But usually for those, sleep hygiene is not what is maintaining their insomnia. It isn't, but it is not the thing that's going to help fix their fact. Continuing to give sleep hygiene recommendations can be frustrating. So we're going to check in on these things, but that's not going to be where we're going to focus most of our time. Some additional kind of sleep education background stuff. We want to make sure that we're telling our families that they should have a consistent bedtime and wake time, and that they shouldn't vary by more than 1 to 2 hours. A lot of adolescents will say, oh, but my friends, they do this. And unfortunately, if you have insomnia, sometimes you do have to do things a little bit different. However, I always say, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. So if you have a teenager who varies their schedule, they're getting A's, they're socially engaged, they feel good during the day, I'm not going to argue about you staying up late at night. But if it is a problem, then we do need to address it. A bedtime routine, powerful for everyone, whether you are an or 6 years old, doing the same activities in the same order tells your body and your brain that we're getting ready for bed. It kind of gives us cues in our environment that starts to shut down our brain and our body. So that's really important for everyone. And then ideally an independent sleep space, although that's not always possible for our families. Okay, so moving on. If you learn any intervention today, or if you put any intervention in your back pocket, I hope that it's stimulus control. So if you have, again, mostly older kids, adolescents, and adults with a sleep insomnia specifically, stimulus control has been studied over and over again and is the most effective component in within CBTI. So there's a lot of research that says if you just do control, your insomnia will get better. So it is approved and recommended by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine as a single component therapy, and it's quick and easy to understand, which makes it perfect for an integrated care setting. So stimulus control is really to be used when a person is spending a significant amount of time in bed awake but not sleeping. So this could be spending time in bed engaged in another activity like homework, watching TV, looking at your phone, or it could be time spent trying to fall asleep. So tossing, turning, worrying, ruminating, doing all of these things that are not consistent with sleep. And what happens when you spend time in bed awake is that you develop what we call conditioned arousal, which means your bed, kind of from a stimulus response perspective, the stimulus being your bed, is now associated with arousal as opposed to being associated with sleep and sleepiness. So, what do? These are the steps, really quite easy. First of all, only go to bed when you are sleepy, not tired. Sleepy is eyelids are droopy. If you close your eyes, you're going to fall asleep quickly. Tired can be like, I woke up 2 hours ago and I'm kind of dragging a little bit. I need a cup of coffee, or you're fatigued. Often can be associated with depression or pain, other feelings. But you want to be in bed when you're sleepy, not tired. The second one, use the bed in the bedroom only for sleeping. Don't read there, don't work there, don't watch TV there. And so, really, we're just trying to recondition that stimulus response for the bed to be equal to sleep and not other activities. If we're working with individuals who have chronic illness or physical limitations where they need to be spending more time in bed, I often will try to talk with our migraine kiddos, for example, where they really do just need to lay down. Just, can you go lay in mom and dad's bed, or can we find a comfortable place on the couch? Or if you are someone who is needing to spend a lot of time in bed, what else can we do in your environment to make it as different as possible? Open the drapes, prop up the pillows, use aromatherapy, use music, use whatever you can so that your environment during the day is different than at night. The third step, get out of bed if you can't fall asleep, and do this pretty quickly. So at the beginning of the night or in the middle of the night, if you've had an awakening, you need to get out of bed after about 15 to 20 minutes and go to another room and engage in a quiet activity. Often you're going to want to problem solve what that activity is with the patients you work with so that they're not lost on what to do. But it should be, again, relaxation is great, but another quiet activity. And then these last two, you've got to get up at the same time every morning, no matter how many times you're in and out of bed. That's going to build that sleep pressure throughout the day and make it more likely that you're going to stay asleep the next night, and you absolutely cannot take a nap. So pretty easy to teach. You can do it in about 5 to 10 minutes with families. And again, it's very effective if you are adherent to the protocol. All right, last thing I will mention, in our younger kiddos under the age of about 5 to 6, sleep associations are most common. Or what we call behavioral insomnia. Sleep association is when a kid needs something, most commonly a parent, in order to fall asleep at the beginning of the night. Our teens often will have a sleep association with their phone or the TV, but this is anything in your environment that you need in order to fall asleep. Sleep associations are only problematic if they change in the middle of the night. So if you are a kiddo that needs a certain blanket in order to fall asleep, and that blanket is in your bed all night long, no problem. If you are a kid who needs a parent to fall asleep and your parent's falls asleep with you at the beginning of the night and then goes to their bed, more likely that that kid is going to wake up in the middle of the night, have a full awakening, and come seek the thing that's going to help them fall back to sleep. So kids with sleep associations commonly have no problem falling asleep at the beginning of the night. Parents will be like, no, they're great. They fall asleep quickly, easily, no problem. The issue is that they're waking up in the middle of the night over and over and over again, and they're coming to get me. And so importantly with sleep associations, we have to provide psychoeducation to our families, because what we're going to do is we're going to tell them to make the good part of the night, the falling asleep, difficult for a while in order to fix the middle of the night awakenings. So you have to master falling asleep independently at the beginning of the night before you're going to be able to fall back to sleep in the middle of the night. A few different ways to do this. Cry it out, which has been villainized by a lot of people, I don't know, on the mommy blogs, but what I can say is it is the quickest, it is the most effective. It is the hardest on parents. It's difficult to do. I am a sleep psychologist, and when I did cry it out with my kids, I had to physically leave the house. I had to go to the gym. My husband was able to do it, no problem, but I could hear those little babies crying, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I should probably go pick them up. Not a good idea if you're doing cry it out. However, it is quick, it is effective, and on the next slide, I'm going to tell you that it does not harm your children. Graduated extinction. This is when the parent returns at regular intervals, whether the child is crying or not. Extinction with parent presence. This is when the parent remains in the room but completely ignores the child until they fall asleep. So do not look at the child, do not talk to the child, pretend the child is not there. And then finally, parent fading. This is when we have our parents do sort of a combination of extinction with parent presence plus fading. So maybe sit on the edge of the child's bed, then sit on a chair next to the bed, then move the chair away. Slowly and surely, you're going to be out of the room before you know it. Um, so, will this hurt my child? The most common question we get from parents, in short, no. We have a lot of research to actually say that in the immediate, when you are doing the intervention, it is stressful for both the parent and the child. Cortisol levels do increase. So I'm not going to, lie to anyone here. You will feel like this is the end of the world. Like I said, it's very stressful, but it is quick. And then what we know is that immediately following a sleep intervention that involves crying, the child is more secure, they're more predictable, they're less irritable both at night and during the day, they cry less. I don't have it on this slide, but I think equally important, we also see that parental depression, particularly maternal depression, also improves. So we see both improvement in child outcomes and parent outcomes immediately. And then when we look at these kids across 5 years, we see no negative effect on child mental health, psychosocial functioning, stress regulation. It does not impact that parent-child relationship or attachment, and it doesn't really impact parent mental health or parenting styles. So after about 5 years, everybody evens out. We're all about the same, but there is some immediate benefits. Again, we also don't need to force this on anybody. It's only a problem if it's a problem. So in sum, sleep is important. We know that. Kids and teens don't get enough sleep and sleep problems are common. Fortunately, we know how to fix them pretty quick and easy if we can get our kids and families to do it. And behavioral health specialists are really pretty good at doing these interventions. So that is everything that I have for you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So if you guys have any questions, references are here on the next couple of slides if you guys ever want to look at them. What questions do you have? Yeah, Jamil.
Thank you so much. That was great and very informative. One of the questions I have for teens who engage in vaping and marijuana, can you talk a bit about how we can provide some good guidance and psychoeducation around how that affects their sleep? I have a patient who says it's helped sleep for a long time, but now she's experiencing some insomnia. I mean, never mind the issue that she's a minor and we need to do something about the fact that she has access to it. But, this is what the reality is.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, great question. So we do see this a lot with substances where often they make falling asleep easier, particularly the use of like marijuana, but can make sleep more difficult across time. And really, I would equate this to even accepted either over-the-counter supplements or any prescribed medications that make it easier to fall asleep. It's a Band-Aid for one of these things we've just talked about. And so that's really kind of where I would start with our families or individuals who are using some substance. Sometimes they can actually be the legal over-the-counter prescribed medications can be really helpful for getting us on track. But if we use them across times, our bodies will build tolerance and will require those things in order to fall asleep. The other important thing to note is that as soon as you stop using, which we all know, it will get worse before it gets better. So really preparing our kids and our teens to say, you know, we're going to stop vaping or we're going to stop using marijuana right before bed. Your sleep will get worse and you're going to want to use this thing, but across time, your sleep is actually going to get better. But often, you know, we can look into the research for various substances, but while they can help us fall asleep, it can mess with our sleep architecture. So the amount of time we spend in REM and non-REM. And so even if you do sleep throughout the night, you'll wake up and you'll feel worse because your brain didn't spend enough time in those important, you know, non-REM, slow wave sleep stages. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and again want to thank you for a really informative presentation. I feel every time I hear about sleep, I learn something new, and it's always just a good reminder. So I guess I wanted to ask, and we can open up to the group too, in terms of how people have maybe flexibly applied some of these interventions, because I think the challenge that I've had, like for instance with stimulus control, like you really do need to follow, right, for it to work. But then there's like when you go to do it, there's the kind of the reality of like, maybe someone doesn't have the best kind of sleep environment, or they may, you know, how do we work with families about rules about the phone? And so I'm just kind of curious, you or others, about how do you, like, we want to have fidelity to this intervention because it's really important, but like, how do you mix in that flexibility and meeting kind of families where they're at?
I think that's such an important question, because you really do have to have a high level of motivation to engage in these interventions, because the last thing you want to do if you've had insomnia is to get out of bed, right? Like your whole entire life is built on the fact that I need to sleep more. And then we're going to tell you, go ahead and sleep less, get out of bed. So you do have to have motivation. The other thing, so motivational interviewing, I think, you know, goes hand in hand with some of these interventions. The other thing I will mention is that all of these interventions assume that you have a safe, comfortable, independent sleep space, that you have a family that has a level of stability that's going to make these conducive, and often that's not the case. So I can think of a kiddo who was living with aunt and uncle. He was sleeping on the couch. The couch is where he watched TV, did homework. There was not another sleep space. So we really had to think creatively around, well, what can we do in your environment? You really do want to fall asleep at night, but what can we do to adapt some of these interventions? And even if it's, you know, sitting on the other side of the couch when you're watching TV and doing homework, and this side of the couch when you're falling asleep, and we're going to do the best we can, but we're not going to judge if there are nights that just doesn't work. But I would love to hear how others have sort of adapted as well. Maybe I'll jump in and say one more thing while people are thinking. The other one that comes up regularly is co-sleeping, and that is incredibly culturally tied. If you were to go to many places in the United States and in other countries, and if they were to hear that, you know, we put these tiny sweet babies in cribs by themselves, they would think it was child abuse, to be frank. So it is very much a cultural thing. Now, also tied to sleep safety. So we can't ignore that sleeping independently is safer for the child. But when we stigmatize co-sleeping, then our families still do it. They just don't tell us about it. And so when we open those conversations up with families, I want to be very clear that there are a lot of ways to sleep safely and co-sleep. And if we can just have those conversations together. In fact, what we know when we look at all of the things that contribute to sudden infant death syndrome, parental use of drugs and alcohol, far stronger predictors than co-sleeping. So if you're going to do a co-sleeping arrangement, what we want to do is make sure we're going to do it safely. So that would be another example of times when I think we often say this is the only way to do it, but in fact, that's just going to alienate families who really could use our help and our guidance.
Thank you. I feel like that's a really good example of, right, we have this kind of recommendation and there's a reason for it, but how do you be flexible in it if people are going to be doing it and it's kind of a cultural, or it's tied to their value system? How do you have conversations interventions with them.
And co-sleeping by choice, and then also co-sleeping not by choice. I work with a lot
Yeah.
of families that live in a single bedroom and they co-sleep because there's only one bed. And I will say you can do all of the interventions we just talked about. You have to be a little more creative. So instead of mom and kiddo going to bed at the same time, we're gonna break a sleep association by putting kid asleep, and we're gonna do the same interventions while mom goes out to the kitchen or whatever it may be. But yeah, you just have to be creative.
Yeah. Other questions folks have for Dr. Van Dyk? I have a question from one of our leadership that was unable to stay on, and she had a good question about apps or resources that might be geared towards helping parents support kids sleep.
Yeah, great question. There are a few resources. I should have come prepared with some specific. I will say for our teens and adults, the VA developed this CBTI app. It's evidence-based. It's been tested. It works really quite well. It's freely available. So that is something for our teens and our adults that I highly recommend. It should be used in conjunction with a provider, but it can help, provide a lot of help there. Sleep Council provides a lot of free resources online. And then the National Sleep Foundation provides a lot of resources online. And then babysleep.com. Those are the three websites that I would say trusted brands. Some of the leaders in the field of sleep use these. And so I would recommend checking those out as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments from the group? Maybe my last question, if no one has one. I know you focused. Oh, Jamil, go for it.
I was just gonna say, any tips around how to have these conversations in an integrated setting? Any tricks of the trade in terms of how to insert this in the interventions that have worked well, or that worked well, or anyone has found to be helpful.
Yeah, so I will say in these integrated settings, a lot of families are struggling with sleep, and if you ask, it will come out, but often it's not the most pressing issue, right? You've got a kid who behaviorally is having a lot of challenges, or feeding is maybe having difficulties, so the first thing is ask, how's your kid sleeping? And then to keep it brief, I usually make a couple of assumptions and then do some digging. If we have a teen, I'm almost certain there's a stimulus control conditioned arousal component. So I immediately do some targeted intervention about what time do you get into bed? How long does it take you to fall asleep? What are you doing during that time? And then try to go into that conversation about, can we do a stimulus control intervention? With our younger kids, I'm going to assume there's a sleep association. And so we're talking with parents of, are they waking up in the middle of the night? What does bedtime look like? Are you falling asleep with them there? And then trying to talk about sleep associations. I also make some assumptions about interventions that are going to work, propose, and then talk, in a very collaborative way about what we think is going to work best. Almost always with our younger kiddos, while cry it out is most effective, it's also most difficult. And so almost always some version of staying with the child, ignoring them while you're in the room, and then fading out of the bedroom is almost always going to be the thing that parents pick, in my experience. And so I sort of present that one and also say, hey, we can also talk about cry it out and talk about these other ones. And so that's in an integrated care setting. I'm trying to make these shortcuts, as we all do, and then make sure we do a good assessment so we're not kind of off base.
I like that. And I think also just kind of a reminder in terms of treatment targets, right? You mentioned that patients probably aren't going to come in immediately saying that this is the issue, but it's very likely there might be an issue there. And I think just a reminder for me of following up on that. And it might be the case that might be the first thing we target, even though that wasn't always the initial kind of referral issue, or so.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also will say that sometimes behavioral health is a little scary. And this is a really non-stigmatizing way to get our foot in the door. Very commonly, we'll have teens with anxiety, depression, insomnia. They're willing to work on their insomnia. They don't want to talk to me about their anxiety and depression. But after meeting with me a couple of times, suddenly I'm a psychologist, not so scary. Foot in the door. Now we're doing anxiety treatment as well. So I also think it's a nice way for us to kind of build a relationship.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for your presentation and answering our questions. I know many of us kind of, I think we learned a lot, ways to kind of adapt to our practice. So thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you in July.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.